When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gong-yong. Every weekday, only on Arirang.
It's an era of trust and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Speaking at the annual national...
Now, the poll results expected late tonight won't lead to a structural change in the central government or even the National Assembly legislature, but that doesn't mean they won't hold special meeting for the Park administration, which of course is facing its biggest political crisis since coming into power early last year. Let's take a closer look at the significance of today's elections, the implications, and what we can expect after all of the votes have been counted. Joining us live via Skype is Dr. Robert E. Kelly. He is a professor of political science at Busan National University. Professor Kelly, it's good to see you again.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
Now, we have presidential, parliamentary, and local elections here in Korea, so it's, I would presume, probably safe to say that the general public isn't as interested in the local elections as the first two. However, I'm feeling that the mood is definitely different this time around. Why don't you please go over why that is the case?
Sure. Well, local elections like this generally see lower turnout. That means fewer people turn out and show up to vote. You see this phenomenon actually in a lot of Western democracies as well. In the United States, for example, in the years between presidential elections, they have congressional elections and very few people show up when the president runs. However, it stokes a lot of interest and people come out to vote. And that's probably what's going to happen today. These are local elections. They're simply not as important as the big national ones. And so fewer people will come out to vote. So that's that's like one structural issue. In the background, though, of course, is the Sewol incident, which has galvanized a huge sort of national outpouring of sort of grief and concern about the country's direction and the rest of it. This was very unprecedented, and nobody really expected this at all, of course. And so people expect that this will actually drive a high turnout, particularly among younger voters, people who didn't vote for Park Geun-hye in the past, and they may take advantage of the local election here to register a protest movement.
Right, so definitely this will be a barometer of how the public feels about the administration. Now, what about a voter turnout? You briefly touched upon that, but how will that factor into the final results? I mean, the figure, according to the National Commission, right now it stands at or stood at 49.1% as of 4 p.m. Korea time. That's roughly 2 hours before the polls close at 6 p.m. And that includes the more than 11% turnout in early voting. Now, how do you think this will play out? What does this mean, this voter turnout rate?
Sure. Well, traditionally, the social science on Korean elections says that higher turnout means that the vote swings more to the left. Korea's older voters, who are more conservative, people who are over the age of 50, they also vote a lot, particularly pensioners and elderly. They have more time, they have flexibility and stuff like that. Working families have a harder time getting off and going to vote and stuff like that. So older people vote more. In Korea, that means that you have a strong conservative base. So if you drive up the turnout, though, right, if you push turnout to 75 or 80%, then you're getting more and more younger voters. Korean voters, younger voters are very much on the left. They strongly voted against Park Geun-hye 2 years ago. So the working assumption is if more people show up to vote, that should push the vote to the left. But this is what people predicted. The only sort of hang up here is that this is what people predicted in 2012. They said, if there's a strong vote, it's going to swing the election, and it actually did not. Park Geun-hye managed to win by a couple percentage points, even though turnout was, if I remember, it was like over 75%, which was very high. So for the left to do well today would require a lot of people to show up, and so far, as you said, the turnout's only around 50%. So it's looking like to be a better day for the right than people had expected, especially given Sewol. The right's doing better than we thought.
Right. I mean, like you said, the surveys conducted in late May indicated that strong public criticism of President Park, mostly led by liberal younger Koreans, has likely pushed voters who typically make up President Park's base, older conservative people, like you said, to respond by rallying behind ruling party candidates. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, the larger structural issue is that it tells me that Korea is actually becoming something of a polarized society. Right, that you have a really deep generational split. And I think we saw this in 2012 also, when everybody said basically if under 40-year-old Koreans come out to vote, Park is going to lose. If they don't, she's going to win. That's actually sort of a longer term issue, right, is how do you sort of seal that structural rift? And that rift has just been aggravated by the Sewol incident, as you said, Sewol sort of activated first a sort of younger coalition of Korean voters, people who came out and said President Park should resign, and they marched in the Blue House, and they had the candlelight vigils and stuff like that. And then that provoked a backlash, which I think no one really anticipated, where, like you just said, sort of Korean older voters came out saying, no, we have to sort of come back and support the president and stuff like that. So I think if I had to guess, Sewol will probably move the needle 5 to 10 percentage points today. That will help the left in some of the closer races, but it's not going to be the landslide that maybe people thought 2 or 3 weeks ago.
All right, let's move on to what happens after the elections. What kind of changes do we expect in the country's political landscape after the final results are out?
Sure. I think the most important thing nationally is that this will be understood as a referendum on President Park's presidency to date. She's been in there now for, I think, 16 months. And this is the first chance Korean voters have had since she was elected to actually go and register their opinions. We know that smaller elections like this are often used as a protest vote. They're often used as a vehicle for the voters to express their discontent with things like that, things coming from the national level. We saw this at the European Parliament elections 2 weeks ago, where there was really sort of like a burst of sort of like right-wing anger, but people didn't really want to elect Nazis to the European Parliament. What they really wanted to do was register a protest vote with their governments. And I think that's what we need to see here, right? Is there like a big sort of explosion from below over Sewol or not? And I think, a couple of weeks ago on this program, you and I discussed this. We really expected this, and it's actually not turning out to be the case. Like you said, the voter turnout is lower, I think, than people expected. And so if Sainodi comes through this tonight pretty well, I don't think you're going to see a big course change from the Park administration in the next year and a half. I think the left was really counting on like a big wave today to really push President Park to sort of throw her presidency into trouble, and that's not really turning out to be the case. At least it doesn't look like it.
Well, the final results we will find out in less than 2 hours' time, so we look forward to that. All right, Robert E. Kelly, professor at Busan National University, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.